Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me this Sunday. Um, so, um, just to start, um, I would like to just remind everybody that um, the more people that we have involved in this, the better. So, if you could make sure that you hit the like button, share these broadcasts with other people. Thank you very much. And when we talk about any kind of a topic, like today, when we're talking about the seven states of matter, we always keep in mind that any topic that we talk about has esoteric ramifications, that because the universe and everything in it is all basically all one thing. You and I are all one thing. You dig deep enough into the system, and we all arrive at the same one substance. And that substance has a material side and an energy side. The energy side we can't measure directly. We can measure the effects of that energy on the material universe that we can observe and measure. But as we've said many times before, the universe appears to be fractalized and holographic, that everything in the universe, no matter how large in the cosmic scale or how small in the quantum scale, are inevitably linked together through fractal mathematics, where things repeat themselves with the same design and patterns over and over and over again, based on scale, size, speed, space and time, forwards and backwards, that the yin and yang of the world between the Newtonian physics world of things like this, which we'll be centering ourselves on today, the observable things in the universe, in the matter that makes up what all of this is, has its reflection on the other side of the periodic table wall that I've talked about. We're on the other side of that wall, on the other side of atoms, the smallest physical things that it can exist that still retain their properties as things. For instance, the smallest particle of gold would be an atom of gold, but below that is protons, electrons, and neutrons, and the laws that govern that realm are the quantum laws on the other side of that wall. And they don't seem to be obeying any of the kind of things that we see governing this universe. On the other side of that wall is Alice in Wonderland. But they reflect each other, that the laws that happen in the quantum world are reflected in macro in this world. And there are some indications where science is able to measure those. The other effects up to this point are immeasurable but observable by our consciousness. We can see them happening. We can see the kind of synchronicities and reflective patterns and fractal geometries that happen in different states of consciousness that seem to reflect the same things we see in massive scales in the universe. That the connectome in the brain looks like the connectome in the universe. Things like that. So keep in the back of your mind that when I'm talking about the seven states of matter, I'm talking about, number one, the mystical underpinnings of the number seven. Number one, that has stood the test of time in every culture, as far back as we can measure in the written word. Certain properties of seven show up over and over and over again in this Newtonian macro world. And we'll point some of those out. But remember that all of the 7 properties of, or states of matter that we can identify today, each of those states has spin-offs, which I'm not going to cover today. I may cover that next time. But that there is a counterpart in states of consciousness for each of these 7 states of matter, according to one of the primary laws that Einstein himself elucidated in E equals mc squared. So E equals mc squared, once again, is E is energy, m is matter. E equals m. And that means that matter and energy are actually 2 different properties of the same thing at their polar extremes. So energy would be the most refined form of matter. Consciousness itself would be the most refined form of matter possible. And matter would be the most condensed form of energy, or the most condensed form of consciousness, the most condensed form of an idea in consciousness made manifest. And so when we start to talk about the properties, the 7 properties, the 7 stages, 7 states of matter, we're talking about the 7 states of consciousness as well. And so with that little intro, I also want to remind everyone that the higher purpose for all of these broadcasts is a global mind link with brainwave entrainment soundtracks that we do at the end. So everyone, if you're new, we use headphones. So during this broadcast, make sure that you get some headphones and hook them into your system, because synchronicity of the hemispheres and brain entrainment is part of what aligns consciousness together in a place where we can open doorways to higher levels of information and experience and influence. That being said, welcome to our today's Global Mind Link live stream. So we're going to be talking about the 7 states of matter. Now, which go beyond solids and liquids and gases. The 3 main ones that we learned in high school in science class, where the macro universe that we're familiar with is made of solids and liquids and gases. If this was water, it would be mist and water and ice. So we know that at a microscopic viewpoint, that each of these is made of molecules, and molecules are made of atoms, and atoms are made of protons, electrons, and neutrons, and on down that rabbit hole. But everything in the universe is in a state of motion, including a solid. Solids have a natural resonance. And every type of solid and every kind of density of solid has a unique resonance. It's a resonance signature. So do each of us. Our primary unique identity as a being represents a quantum resonance that's solidifying into the macro world that we see around us. Our physical bodies that are made of solid materials are in a state of vibration, and those vibrations are octave and harmonic resonance relationships to the fundamental resonance of my consciousness itself that makes me unique. So I represent a massive chord of frequencies that are related to each other according to the laws that we see in music of harmonics and overtones, and the key of us is the core idea that makes me a unique consciousness in the universe. So this would be representing a solid, and then let's say this is ice, and you add more energy to the system, which generates heat, more vibration, turns it into a liquid, melts it into a liquid. Now we can see that the molecules are more separated and they're not lattice-like, that they're more free-flowing. And we heat this up more, it becomes a gas, water vapor. So it's got to do with this. This is 3 states of matter right here: solid, liquid, gas. And these we see around us all the time. This becomes really obvious. If the heat goes higher and higher and the pressure goes higher and higher, then we get new things like a plasma. And a plasma, I think that was discovered somewhere around the 50s. Plasma is, well, here, say, multiple beams of colored plasma filaments can be seen oscillating within this plasma ball. A plasma ball is usually a clear glass sphere filled with a mixture of noble gases, such as neon and argon. A plasma is formed when voltage is applied to an electrode. Now, I happen to, give me a second here. I'm getting something off my shelf, so give me a second while I do that. Happen to have one? Of course I do, right? So this is a plasma, just like this ball that I'm showing you. Plasma ball. It's in the shape of a butterfly, but it's the same. If I touch it, then, so there's an electrical current coming through. This chamber is a gas chamber filled with 2 noble gases. And the noble gases are most likely what they said, neon and argon. And the electricity is stripping those atoms of their electrons. And the electrons are now floating around free in this electromagnetic soup of charged electromagnetic fields that behave something like a gas and something like a liquid. But you can see that it's got odd and strange sort of properties. And in the natural world, that would be our sun. Stars in the solar system, all of them are so energetic and so hot that it's tearing the atoms apart and having the protons, electrons, and neutrons floating around free in this 4th state of matter called a plasma. So because the universe is mostly a vacuum, it means that there's no oxygen there, so you can't actually have a fire. So the sun is not really a fire, it's a plasma. The heat and stripping the electrons forms this 4th state of matter that's got huge amounts of energy. And it's these plasma, this is a gigantic ball of plasma. And the ejections coming off of here are flying off into space. That's called the solar wind. And the solar wind is a plasma wind shooting into space. And when that plasma wind strikes Earth, then it's so powerful that it blows the electromagnetic envelope of the planet and the ionosphere, blows it back like a comet tail. So if you could see it in the plasma spectrum, you would see that the solar wind is blowing all of the electromagnetic envelopes of all the planets in our solar system away from the sun like comet tails. So as they orbit around the sun, these comet tails are facing away from the sun as they move. The leading edge of that ion field, where the solar wind strikes the ion field, is a boiling nexus of vibrating ions, and they happen to vibrate exactly within the range of human hearing, 20 to 20,000 hertz. And when NASA first saw that phenomenon in, Jupiter and Uranus and Neptune and Saturn and all the other planets, it sort of blew their minds because sound doesn't propagate in a vacuum. So what is sound doing within the range of human hearing in space? And so that was part of the duty of Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, was to collect recordings of these vibrating ions within the range of human hearing and send them back. And the effect that these sounds were having on people who heard them was extraordinary, to a point where one of the scientists at the U.S. government labs that works with JPL and NASA, that was TRW, he approached me, gave me a phone call, because he couldn't find anybody who had any interest or any obvious expertise in trying to figure out what are these sounds doing to the human psyche, what kind of things. So I was a pretty famous guy at that time with brain entrainment and states of consciousness and sound. And so I was the guy to come to. So that's how I got these NASA space sound recordings from the outer planets from the Voyager 2 and 1 and 2 programs. Now, I did broadcasts in the past about these space sounds, and I've mentioned them a couple of times in the 15 broadcasts that I've done up to this point. But 2 years ago, I did 2 years of these live streams and covered a lot of different topics, and space sounds was one of them. I call that primordial sounds, primordially recognizable to some place in the deep unconscious mind. So this concept of a fourth state of matter is now well recognized, the fourth state being a plasma. Now, plasmas are used in commerce like neon signs. So they're called neon signs because it has a glass tube that's a vacuum tube filled with neon, one of the noble gases. Different noble gases will excite themselves into different colored plasmas. So each of these signs would have a different plasma in order to create that color. There are now 7 noble gases: helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, radon, and ogadeson. Now, back for most of my life, in the periodic table, there were only 6 noble gases, not 7. I predicted a 7th noble gas back in 1989. And why that was the case was because each of these noble gases links with one of the chakras. And since there's 7 chakras, another magic number of 7, and there were only 6 noble gases, that left the crown chakra with no noble gas. It took them 20 years before they discovered it, but they did discover it, and they called it ogadeson. And each of these noble gases, like I said, excites with a different color, And the concept of what is a noble gas is kind of an interesting tale in itself. I was fortunate enough when I was going to chiropractic school, when I was taking chemistry and organic chemistry, and a large part of that class was discussing the elements of the periodic table, their properties, how they interact together, particularly in organic chemistry, how physical body systems have utilized specific elements of the periodic table in the process of life, and how those chemicals work together, and why life would choose those chemicals instead of other chemicals to base its system on, why we are a carbon-based system. But when you look at the periodic table, each of all of these complex elements that are here, yttrium and calcium and magnesium and barium and sodium and potassium and rubium, lithium, hydrogen, helium, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, sulfur, all of these different kinds of elements that are in here. This one is gold, and that's silver. That's lead. Ancients were attempting to take lead and change it into gold. They'd first have to change it to silver, then from silver to gold. But that's another story. This is mercury. These are more unstable elements that in many cases they're developed in a laboratory and only have an existence of a few seconds or microseconds before they disappear. But in the structure of atoms, every atom has got this nucleus with protons and neutrons. Protons have a positive charge, and then there's an electron cloud around those with electrons. And that cloud is actually 3 nested clouds, or shells. They call them shells. And the electrons fill these shells up. So the electrons will fill the inner shell, and then when it's full, it can't contain any more electrons. So they will start to populate into the second shell until it's full. Then they'll go to the third shell and fill that one. And the number of protons always has to balance with the number of electrons orbiting around them. So the perfect configuration is to have the same number of protons and neutrons in the nucleus as electrons in the various shells. And all of the elements of the periodic table are in an inappropriate configuration where the number of electrons in the outer shell is either more than it is less than it should be. And it's trying to complete itself by looking for an extra number of electrons to complete its outer shell to match the protons in the nucleus. The only elements of the whole periodic table that have achieved that in their basic structure are the noble gases. They're called noble because these are the sort of the enlightened ones, the elements of the periodic table that have perfect balanced configurations. The same number of protons in the nucleus as electrons in the outer shell. So they're completely stable. They're called inert. They have no desire to interact with any other element of the periodic table. They're complete unto themselves, the enlightened ones, the masters. And it's the noble gases configurations that every other element in the whole periodic table is attempting to aspire its configuration to match what these guys have achieved, or that they were born with. And the only way for these to do it is to get married to another element. So, for instance, that's why iron has such an affinity to oxygen, because oxygen is missing one electron in its shell, so it's looking for that one, and iron is missing 7, and it needs an 8th one to complete itself. So the two of those get married and form iron oxide, and that's why in organic chemistry, in the physical body, why the body based its blood system and its hemoglobin on particles of elemental iron, because elemental iron has the strongest affinity to oxygen of any element of the periodic table. So it's a good way of attracting oxygen and carrying it around in the blood and giving it to tissues. Ingenious how the whole system works. But these noble gases, being the enlightened ones, the perfect stable configurations, that's the reason why these have always been associated with the chakras. The chakras being balanced etheric spinning energy centers that extract finer and finer degrees of prana energy out of the air through these chakra transition centers. The chakra transition centers are etheric vortexes of energy that have a physical counterpart in this physical world. So the chakra is metaphysical, but it has links into the physical world through the meridians. Each chakra has a specific meridian point. Each chakra has a specific gland that goes with it. There are 7 glands in the body, another magical 7 number. And each of those glands has specific properties that link directly to the configuration of the number of petals that you see in the drawings of the 7 chakras from ancient literature. So, the first chakra has 4 petals, and then we've got 6 and 10 and 12 and 16 petals, and then we've got 96 and then 960. And indeed, all of the chakras below the neck are related to each other in their petal numbers in a sequence of arithmetic. But once it reaches here and jumps to here, then it's a massive leap from 16 to 900 to 96, and another giant leap from 96 to 960. And you see the representation of that exactly in the functioning of the glands. Now, I covered this in part 1 and 2 of 2 live stream broadcasts that I did 3 or 4 years ago on the chakras. So actually it was 3. It was a 3-part series on the chakras, where I discuss all of this in great detail. All of the endocrine glands below the neck are an endocrine gland is a gland that is infused with blood vessels, and those blood vessels branch down to a microscopic level. So really, an endocrine gland is deeply married with a matrix of blood vessels. So when that gland produces a specific hormone, it has an instantaneous effect on the body, like adrenaline. So if we have a fight or flight response and the adrenals turn on, the adrenaline immediately is in the blood. It's called a ductless gland. There's no duct or tube that the hormone has to go down to get to the body. It's infused right into the blood vessels. So as soon as the hormone is produced, it's in the blood immediately for a most instant type of effect. So, this would be like the thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland. And this would be the thymus gland that sits on top of the heart. 10 years ago, the heart was actually reclassified as an endocrine gland. So the heart does produce endocrine hormones. So it's an endocrine gland proper. So now we can truly call this a heart chakra and not a thymus chakra. And then we've got adrenals and pancreas and gonads, and all of those below the neck have a hormone they produce, or maybe two hormones that have an instant effect on the body. And that brings us to here. And when we jump that by 10 times to 96 from 16, we see that the gland associated with the brow chakra, the pituitary gland has two lobes. It hangs down from the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is this little triangular zone in the center of the brain where the autonomic nervous system resides that we've discussed many times. Sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system control all the internal systems in the body. It's a master control system. It's also the center of my fight or flight response. It's hardwired directly down into the pituitary gland and controls the pituitary gland and tells it what to do. It's hardwired into the pineal gland, tells it what to do. They influence each other. The pituitary gland is also an endocrine gland, but the same kind of difference that you see between 16 and 96 is in the function of these endocrine glands versus these. So the difference here is that the pituitary gland produces a whole series, a whole range of hormones, not just one or two, but a whole range. And those hormones have no effect on the body at all. Like the ones down here have an instantaneous, very powerful effect on the body instantaneously. And all the big range of hormones up here have no effect on the body at all because they target these endocrine glands down here and tell them to turn themselves on or off. So really, that is a big, magnificent difference. The same kind of difference you see between 16 and 96 is the difference between having an effect on the body and only having an effect on these glands. So this is like the conductor of an orchestra, and this is the orchestra. Then we have 96 and 960. Do we see the same kind of step-up difference in the pituitary gland versus the pineal gland? And the answer, once again, is yes, that the pineal gland is the only gland that produces this hormone not in the blood, that all these others secrete their hormone into the blood. And so the pineal gland exists in the center of the brain in one of the ventricles of the brain. There are 4 ventricles in the brain, big sort of strange shaped openings in the brain, cavities in the brain that are filled with fluid. The fluid is cerebral spinal fluid. So the endocrine gland of the pineal gland secretes its hormones into the cerebral spinal fluid. And the cerebral spinal fluid circulates around the brain and the brainstem and the spinal cord and the nerve roots. It does empty into a large vein at the top of the brain called the sagittal sinus. After it has been used, it exits out there. So the cerebral spinal fluid is produced inside these ventricles 500 milliliters a day, and it's circulated around the brain and spinal cord with the cranial sacral pump. That's why cranial work and cranial sacral work is so important, because it's an electrolyte and it charges the brain cells. It charges the whole nervous system. In the 60s, when they did experiments with LSD to find out how micrograms of a substance could have such a powerful effect on consciousness, and they did copious physical exams of volunteers, the only physical thing that they could see that changed in the presence of LSD was massive levels of melatonin, which is the hormone produced by the pineal gland. Massive levels of melatonin were being produced. that is synchronized with the psychedelic experience of a deep-seated experience of waking up, of ordinary personality dissolving and big mind being exposed. So it sort of means that it aligns directly with the deep esoteric information that was brought back in the 20s by Gurdjieff, who we had a whole live stream on. That one of the things that Gurdjieff had brought back with him was that the ancients talked about a special gland that activated during moments of perceptions of myself existing that would cause this gland to secrete a special hormone that would magnetically charge up the entire nervous system in the brain. And the nervous system was closely aligned with the chakras, because this, down the central canal of the spinal cord is called Sushumna, and the sympathetic and parasympathetic weave back and forth across the Sushumna, Ida and Pingala, sympathetic, parasympathetic, up the spinal cord. And the interesting thing there is that that's what we see on the heart rate variability program that we use with biotuning. When we find a highly specific frequency that causes the sympathetic and the parasympathetic to go into a special state called homeostasis, where the sympathetic parasympathetic both turn themselves off. Sympathetic parasympathetic reach this zero stress state of complete balance in the system. Then the inner reservoirs fill up with energy, and the internal physician comes online and begins working on a list that heals me. So this concept of homeostasis is a prerequisite for my ability to heal. And it's also a prerequisite seen in research that always has to be present in higher states of meditation and consciousness expansion. I have no possibility of reaching higher states of consciousness unless I can first reach my safe place inside, my place of stillness and calm. That is homeostasis. So those kind of concepts is what is used in each of the soundtracks that I'm creating. The purpose of the soundtracks is to use brainwave entrainment with binaural beats through headphones to cause a synchronicity, entrain the brain to states that cause homeostasis in the autonomic nervous system, so that we're stacking the deck in our favor for the expansion of consciousness. And we're doing it all together in a group mind link, so that all of our consciousnesses listening at the same time to the same headphones are going into exactly and precisely the same brain state, where it's possible for us to truly align and open doorways to higher states of information and influence into the quantum field to change reality itself. Like I said, no small talk Sunday, folks. So when this one was discovered, it was like I had my own little celebration and popped a cork and drank a toast. That now we had all 7 noble gases, one for each of the chakras. And that meant with the other project that I've described, where I've taken the color spectral signature of each element of the periodic table in a project to convert them 43 octaves down to make the sound of each element. The project that's on the shelf that's coming off soon will be the 7 noble gases, so that we can use those in a special program for awakening the 7 chakras by listening to the soundtrack of the element that is aligned with that chakra. Now, this oganesson was discovered by this Russian guy who was working with an American scientist. So there was American-Russian scientists working together element 118, Yuri Oganesson, pioneer in the discovery of synthetic elements with the same Oganesson name. Oganesson and the decay chain of Oganesson 294 were pictured on a stamp of Armenia issued in 2017. So Oganesson naturally degrades into these other elements of the periodic table. This is one avenue of research that I'm interested in to see if this has a direct relationship to states of consciousness of awakening the pineal gland and the crown chakra. Oganesson, atomic weight 294, element number 118. And so here in the middle, which is not pictured, is the nucleus, which has the same number of protons as we see electrons in these various shells. And like I said, that's the one that's associated with the crown chakra up here, which makes the halo. All the great masters and the biblical pictures of Jesus and the saints all had this halo. The halo is the radiance coming from the opening of the crown chakra. In magical lore, 7 is an important number. While all numbers are ascribed certain properties and energies, 7 is a number of power, a lucky number, a number of psychic and mystical powers, of secrecy and a search for truth. The origin of 7's power lies in lunar cycles. The moon has 4 phases, each lasting about 7 days. The Sumerians gave the week 7 days. Life cycles on Earth have phases demarcated by 7. There are 7 years to each stage of human growth, 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 notes on the musical scale, 7 deadly sins. I actually have a whole interesting thing about 7. In ancient Egypt, there were 7 paths to heaven. Osiris led his father through 7 halls of the underworld. Milk teeth happen in 7 months. You lose the milk teeth in 7 years. Reach pre-puberty in 2 times 7 or age 14. Menopause happens around 7 times 7 or age 49. The 7th octave, or 7 times 7, age 49, is the mystical opening age. So it's age 50 is way overrated. Age 49 is the mystical, magical door opening in consciousness for all of us. We go through a spiritual revolution at age 49. Something metaphysical happens in your life at age 49. When I was 49, my 49th birthday, but leading up to my 49th birthday, for 6 months up to that point, I was having dreams every night of Death Valley. Now, that was just disturbing to me. I'm going, I don't know if I like the metaphor of dreaming about Death Valley. Death Valley is about 6 hours north of me, where I live here in San Diego. It got so powerful that I began researching Death Valley. And it turns out Death Valley is a mind-blowing place. It's got all kinds of different terrains. Previously in the past, I did a whole live stream that included information about the HAB theory, H-A-B. The HAB theory had to do with the fact that the convection currents coming from hot air coming off the equator turns the water into vapor faster. That vapor goes up and forms clouds that are laden with this moisture. Those clouds circulate towards the poles. Heat goes towards cold. And as they go towards the poles, the Earth is rotating, so it creates these trade winds that are in a spiral going up towards the poles. And on the way to the poles, as the air cools, the moisture coalesces into rain, and that's where the rainfall comes from. But the lion's share of that rain falls on the poles as snow. And because it's frozen, it doesn't go anyplace unless it melts. So over the, tens of thousands of years, more and more snowpack is accumulating on the poles, and snow has weight. It's heavy. It's actually crushing the landscape down into a crater with all the weight of snow that's added every year. 168 million tons of snow added to the poles every year. The South Pole is an island of ice in an ocean, no solid landmass. No, that's the North Pole. The South Pole is the one that's a landmass, Antarctica. And so the South Pole is getting this crushing weight of snow. And when you look at a map of the South Pole, it's not centered. It's got a little landmass. It's got a thick landmass down here and a smaller one up here. So it's actually creating a wobble. So the Earth is spinning, and it's tilted by a certain amount of degrees. That makes our seasons as it goes around the sun. And also it's wobbling on that tilt. And the wobble is being created by the snow mass on the South Pole that's slightly off center. And the more snow that goes down there, the more the wobble. So back in 1900, when Francis Scott went to the South Pole for an expedition to measure the wobble, that was at 5 yards. And I think it was 25 years later when they went back again, it was 5 miles. So the Hab theory was that this is a regular occurrence, that the possibility of having snowpack on a perfectly balanced continent is pretty slim. So the Earth will continue to wobble to a point where it flips on its side, and then everything is homogenized and all life is extinguished except for 2 places on Earth at the axis point of when it flips. And then he explored the Earth of previous positions of where the poles might be, if that's so, and found depression after depression after depression that would be the characteristic depression. And Death Valley was one of the previous poles. So I was interested to go for that purpose as well. And sure enough, one of the features of Death Valley is it's 290 feet below sea level. It's the lowest elevation point of this half of Earth, which is what you would expect if there was a snow mass crushing the ground down into a giant bowl that's 290 feet below sea level. So you can see the ancient sea there. It's filled with salt. It's giant salt flats. So when you go to visit the lowest elevation point on this half of Earth, and there's a sign there that says, lowest elevation point minus 290 feet below sea level, I was satisfied that since I had stood there, then my life will get better from that point on, because I've been to the lowest of my life. The lowest point in my life, I just hit it. Now everything is going to be better from that point on. That's when I was 49, what I did for my birthday. So as I said in the beginning, there is a esoteric counterpart in consciousness itself to each of the different types of 7 states of matter. The 3 states of matter, heated, solid, changes to a liquid, and then to a gas. You know about plasma, fourth state, which appears when heated, excited further. Heated, excited states of consciousness. Heated means more energetic. The more that molecules vibrate, the more that thermodynamics takes place. Heat is directly related to vibration. Sound in the grand, yin yang of the universe, where electromagnetism on the one hand, the electromagnetic spectrum forms sort of everything we see as we were taught in school, but the other half of the universe is sound, which is pure energy moving through a medium at a certain frequency, which governs thermodynamics, that heat is generated from vibration. And who controls vibration is sound. Sound is vibration, pure energy moving at a frequency that creates heat. And that has a direct relationship to states of consciousness that get more energetic and cause deep changes in the material world, because changes are happening in the energetic world of consciousness itself. And because E equals M, energy equals matter, different higher and higher energetic states of consciousness are having higher and higher effects on physical matter in the realm of consciousness. Quark gluon plasma, fifth state, extremely high energy densities like during the origin of the universe. Two more states in the ultra cold side, which are Bose-Einstein condensates and fermionic condensation. We'll get into these things. But the mystical nature of the seven states of matter, the esoteric flip side of the seven states of matter that are currently recognized in modern physics and quantum physics. Plasma and the strange states of matter made of broken atoms. You break the atoms apart with a huge amount of force, and you end up with protons, electrons, and neutrons floating around by themselves. That becomes plasma. Beyond the three common states of matter, solid, liquid, gas, there exist other states such as plasma, quark, gluon plasma, and degenerate matter. These strange states of matter are rarely if ever found on Earth, but they do exist in space, usually in stars. Theory predicts the existence of stars with even weirder states of matter, but these have not been detected by astrophysicists yet. So, a synopsis. Solid particles in a solid are tightly packed in a regular pattern. Liquid, the particles in liquid are close together with no regular arrangement. Liquids vibrate, move about, slide past each other. Gas particles in a gas are well separated with no regular arrangement. Gas vibrates and moves freely at high speeds. Plasma is made of atoms in which some of or all of the electrons have been stripped away, and positively charged nuclei called ions roam around freely in this new state of matter that behaves something like a liquid and something like a gas, but is electromagnetic in its nature. Bose-Einstein condensate is a state of matter that occurs very close to absolute zero. Very cold. At this extremely low temperature, molecular motion almost stops, and atoms begin to clump together. And strange and weird things happen when they do that, which I'll get to. A quark gluon plasma, the state of matter with the highest energy level. It is basically the building blocks of matter existing in a soup, resembling conditions just after the universe was created. Degenerate matter, the highly compressed state of matter which often exists in the cores of massive stars. The cores of gas is supercompressed, and the primary source of pressure is no longer thermal, but quantum. So the Bose-Einstein condensate at extremely cold temperatures, the velocity distribution data for gaseous rubidium atoms, which confirmed the discovery of the Bose-Einstein condensate in 1995, BECs are a strange lab-made form of matter in which thousands of separate atoms seem to act as one super atom. So at extremely cold temperatures, all the atoms, the vibrations slow down so much that all of a sudden a new phenomenon takes place, a quantum phenomenon that attracts them to clump together. Once they've all clumped together, they're all acting like a gigantic single atom. Similar to what's happening when we clump all of our consciousnesses together in these live streams. When we have an entrainment to all these different atoms of consciousness coming together, we align ourselves together into a single consciousness that has the possibility of having a different type of influence on the material world. A Bose-Einstein condensate, a state of matter that forms at extremely low temperatures near absolute zero. In the BEC, atoms behave, caught a spelling error. Atoms behave like waves instead of particles, and they all occupy the same quantum state, resulting in unique properties like superfluidity and superconductivity. Now, this picture, I had ChatGPT 5 conceive this picture. When I asked ChatGPT to draw me a picture of the Bose-Einstein condensate, it argued back with me and didn't draw a picture. It answered me and said, you know, I can't really do that because nobody's actually seen it before. And maybe you could go online and search for an artist's rendition. I said, well, why don't you make me an artist's rendition? And finally, it agreed to do that, and this was the picture it came up with. But superfluidity and superconductivity, where all the atoms are acting as one atom that doesn't exist as a particle but exists as a wave, and a wave is the properties of sound. Sound is a wave. So this is more of what it's like. So each of these dots would be an atom, but all the atoms are linked together. And if you look closely, you'll see that, see if I can get my, pretty hard to see my mouse there, but over to the left, you'll see these circles here. Just a bunch of circles overlapping each other, and you pick out one of these little black balls, you'll see all of the balls, each one is only moving in a circle. And they're all moving at the same speed because they're all quantum linked together. And when they all move at the same speed, linked together that way, they form these sort of apparent waves like you see in the middle. It looks like water, look like energy moving through water, because that's what a wave is on the ocean. When you're on a boat in the middle of the ocean, you see waves go by. The water molecules are just spinning in place. They're not moving. Water molecules are staying in place. The energy is moving through the water and making the energy that's usually invisible, visible. So the wave that's moving through is pure energy moving through a medium. It's sound, energy. Same thing happens at a quantum level. So a series of particles moving along circular paths can appear to create a macroscopic illusion of waves. Similarly, individual water molecules that move in a particular pattern can produce macroscopic water waves. And the gravitational waves we see are likely made out of individual quantum particles that compose them, called gravitons. Now, I've discussed this before, that gravity waves, which are massive, and the distance peak to peak is hundreds of millions of years, they seem to be frozen in place from our time scale. But from the universe's time scale, it's a pebble making ripples in space-time. Those ripples are sound waves. And so that's what we're calling gravity waves. It's just, but it's a fractal pattern that we see in quantum fields inside consciousness itself that also exists as waves. And the sort of the math that runs all of that stuff is fractal holographic, and it's all same kind of stuff. The quark gluon plasma. Freeing an electron from an atom is relatively simple compared to disassembling its nucleus. But this can be done too, and the result is a quark gluon plasma. So what we're starting to see emerge here is these 7 states of matter are, first of all, in the case of a plasma, we're stripping electrons out of the outer shells of an atom, and they're floating around as charged particles. And the nucleus is now, the protons in the nucleus don't have a negative charge to balance them, so now they become ions floating around. We've got negative ions, positive ions floating around in this soup. This quark gluon plasma is now attacking the nucleus itself and stripping it apart. But it takes a lot more energy to strip a nucleus apart than it does to strip electrons out of the outer shells. So that creates a new type of plasma. That's a quark gluon plasma. And quarks are what make up protons, and gluons are the particle that holds the nucleus together. It holds the protons and the neutrons together. Something's holding them together, and they invented a particle and named it gluon because it's gluing them together. But when you strip those apart, now you've got quarks that make up protons and gluons forming a new type of electromagnetic field plasma that's also sort of an electromagnetic soup, but it's a more quantum phenomenon. It's consciousness penetrating with your imagination into the quantum field. Consciousness is the only thing in the universe, aside from the actual fact of it happening, that can freely travel to these realms. That in my consciousness, I can imagine stripping electrons out of their fields, and I can imagine an electromagnetic sort of fog or state of matter. I can imagine cooling atoms down and to a point where they start to fuse together. Cool them down so they slow down and you can barely see any kind of vibration. Now they start sticking together and forming vast waves of influence acting as one giant atom. I can imagine going into the nucleus of a cell and stripping that apart. My imagination, my consciousness is able to go to these places. In quark gluon plasma, quarks and gluons, which are elementary particles that are commonly confined within protons and neutrons, become liberated and can move freely within a hot and dense medium. This state of matter is thought to be characterized by the deconfinement of quarks and gluons, meaning they are no longer bound together within individual hadrons, such as protons and neutrons, but exist independently in a free-flowing cloud that's much more quantum state of plasma. Degenerate matter. There's other weird stuff out there. White dwarfs and neutron stars are made of degenerate matter. A typical atom has a minuscule nucleus containing nearly all of its mass, surrounded by a great deal of nearly empty space populated by a thin fog of featherweight electrons. Degenerate matter collapses this empty space and packs what remains with particles. So this is, the universe is 99.9% space between things. At an atomic scale, the atom is the same way. The nucleus is a pinpoint, and the electrons are hugely further away than you would expect. And in degenerate matter, the type of white dwarfs and neutron stars are so compact and so gravity is so immense that it's able to squeeze all that space out and jam all the electrons, protons, and neutrons together and fuse them up into a new state of matter that is hard to imagine, but it can be imagined because I just described it. So human beings have the possibility of taking your mind to these places where there's no empty space in an atom any longer. Everything is squashed together. And the next stage beyond that would be what we did a whole broadcast on, a black hole, where the compression is so great that the atomic structures begin to disobey the rules that govern this universe. So they have to pop out of this universe and go someplace else where it's okay to exhibit those properties because they can't exist here. So a black hole is an opening into another dimension where those rules can apply. In the realm of consciousness, our consciousness can go to places where the rules that govern this universe that we're familiar with no longer apply. We can go into alternate dimensional states of consciousness and experience all kinds of things that you would never imagine could be part of this reality that we're familiar with. These are the pictures that I coaxed ChatGPT-5 into finally drawing, and I had to do an argument every single time to finally get them to draw a picture for me. Bose-Einstein condensate at near absolute zero, everything clumps together and becomes a giant atom. Quark gluon plasma, where we start to strip the nucleus apart, the protons and the neutrons apart, which takes huge amounts of energy to do, creates a new quantum plasma, which has strange behavior forms. And degenerate matter, where the pressures are so immense that all the space that makes it 99.9% of an atom is crushed down, so there's zero space, and everything is squashed together in a new phase of matter that's called degenerate matter. All of these different stages form waves of influence in the universe at 7 different levels. That's an octave. The universe, as far as we can see up to this point, is an octave of different stages of materiality. There are borders between various stages that form spin-off phases of matter that I said I would discuss at another time because it would take too long to do all in just one session. But the wave-particle duality of reality at a quantum field level, where if I look away from particles, they function as waves, and if I look at them and measure them, they collapse into particles. That's the wave-particle duality. The deepest part of the universe, where things begin to collapse into forms that we're not familiar with, like the black holes of the world, the states of consciousness associated with going to that depth of investigation into the nature of reality. Even the idea of passing into other dimensions in our consciousness, into, say, wormholes of consciousness to other dimensions, and experiencing those. The highest states that are described in the ancient texts and literatures, the 7 yogic abilities. And one of those abilities is the ability of consciousness to become infinitely large or infinitely small. Just what we're talking about here. That the human mind, when it imagines something, is doing something for real. That here in this world we call it imagination. When you're in it, experiencing it to the point where you're part of it, you are in another dimension. You are exploring other realms. And when you combine that in extremely high states of meditation practices where you travel to these places and you experience these different kinds of things, that is consciousness itself interrogating the laws of the universe and experiencing that directly. All here, represented physically as brainwave patterns of activity that influence the basic functioning of the autonomic nervous system itself. That the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system do something specific when you're in these states. Autonomic nervous system goes into a unique state of balance, this homeostasis state of zero stress in the system, where all the doors and windows open up, my safe place. Springing from that place, my consciousness is now free to fly out the window, where the crown chakra opens up, the big doors open up in the ceiling, and I'm able to freely communicate with the universe at large. My spirit is able to fly free into all the sort of coupled realms that we've been talking about. Realms that are impossible to describe when you come back. All you can do is create allegories and metaphors of what you've experienced. Psychologists might say you just had hallucinations. But we know, those who have been there, who have experienced it, the ancient texts who have described people who have experienced it and have written descriptions of what they've experienced, of the lay of the land, of the spiritual anatomy and physiology, the metaphysical universe and its underpinnings. It's those realms that we aspire to be able to freely go to, because the answers to all the questions are in these places. And that's essentially why we're here. That's what this is all about. And that's why we have these headphones and these soundtracks, and that's where we're going right now. So, headphones, please. Here we go. Welcome back. When you think about it, currently there are 7 master brain states: beta, alpha, theta, delta, the big 4, epsilon, I discovered in 1989, 1988, 89. Beta, alpha, theta, delta, epsilon, gamma, default mode network. We recognize 21 different brain states, but those are the master 7. The rest could be thought of as higher octaves of certain brain states. The borderline states, the borderline between beta, alpha, alpha, theta, theta, delta, are states of consciousness all of their own. But those could be looked upon as the place, a borderline state between a solid and a liquid and a gas. Those are some of these transition states that I was referring to that we could do a whole broadcast on. There's a sort of a borderline state between a gas and a plasma and a quark gluon. So all of these have certain forms of matter that spin in the edges, like the realm of crystals and piezoelectric effects and quasi-crystals, and then liquid crystals, which the body uses in microtubule systems. So there's a whole realm there that could probably have a whole broadcast related to it. Yeah. Anyway, in the direction of where we're going, where deeper and more exotic states of consciousness have their mirror in deeper, weirder states of matter, we will explore that realm next time in psychic states and precognitive states and psi abilities and stuff like that, and the brainwave frequencies that go along with that, and the brainwave entrainment soundtracks that we can make from that in order to boost out of the body experiences, and particularly precognitive and psychic abilities, and enhance intuition and things like that. That's what we'll talk about next time. I'll leave these forums open for a while so we can continue discussing if you wish to. Meantime, have a good week, and I'll see you next Sunday. shape. I got this message from somebody. And it says, I was watching a video on YouTube and I saw your channel. I like the video content, but as a YouTube expert, I noticed one thing. Your video views are getting less and less. And I researched your channel and found that your video SEO score is very bad. Video, and I see that your video is not SEO optimal. You're just trying to sell something. If you do SEO friendly things for your channel, videos like searching for tags, hashtags, descriptions, keywords, and
Yeah, he's not selling anything. He's just.
yeah, that's cool. That's very cool.
There are benefits for being a spiritual person. There are health benefits for no benefits. Here's an article from neuroscience. Mind and new science of neurotheology studies show that religion and spirituality linked to mind and our research aims to figure out how neurotheology is unites brain science and psychology with religious belief and practice. There are several indirect and direct mechanisms that link spirituality with health, compassion, positive